The galaxy had never seen anything like it. A message flashed across the communication networks of countless civilizations, and every species paused, unsure if they had understood it correctly. The humans, known for their patience and calm diplomacy, had spoken, but their words were unlike anything anyone expected. The message was short, clear, and chilling in its simplicity. We will not negotiate with murderers. No introductions, no explanations, no offers of compromise. Just that single statement carried on the highest channels of interstellar communication, reaching every major planet, every council chamber, every listening post. For centuries, humans had been seen as mediators, often the voice of reason when tensions ran high between powerful civilizations. They were the ones who could calm warring empires, convince factions to talk, and prevent conflicts that might have otherwise escalated into devastating wars. And now, the galaxy realized humans had drawn a line. The incident that sparked this declaration had been horrific. A human-allied colony, located on a remote planet at the edge of known space, had been destroyed. Entire populations vanished. Overnight. There were no survivors, no ransom demands, no subtle threats, just brutal, unexplainable slaughter. Reports reached Earth piecemeal, but the reality was undeniable. Humans had lost not just property or territory. They had lost people, their friends, their family, their community. And while most civilizations would have sent messages of condolence or open negotiations, humans acted differently. The message that followed was unprecedented. Earth did not request meetings. They did not call for joint investigations. They did not even ask for explanations. They simply announced that they would not engage with the perpetrators until justice had been served. And the galaxy, accustomed to endless debates and drawn-out diplomatic dances, was stunned into silence. In the great chambers of the Galactic Council, the reaction was one of disbelief and growing fear. Representatives from thousands of species murmured among themselves. Many had assumed that humans would respond as they always did, with caution, patience, and a willingness to talk. That was what humans were known for, their ability to understand, to negotiate, to reason. But now, humans were different. They were resolute, they were unwilling to bend. And worse, they were preparing to act. Outside the chambers, intelligence reports began to circulate, confirming the grim reality. The massacre on the colony had been total. Not a single soul remained alive. Initial reports had suggested an accident, a raid, or a natural disaster. But further investigation revealed something far more sinister. The colony had been deliberately targeted, erased, and abandoned. No negotiations could undo what had been done. No words could bring back the lives that were lost. Humans had seen enough. Rumors spread quickly. Traders, explorers, and scouts began to whisper about fleets moving in the dark spaces between stars. Ships the likes of which the galaxy had rarely seen were leaving Earth's orbit in precise formations. Military analysts tried to estimate the scale, but Earth's fleet was not like any other. The ships moved silently, without broadcasting their positions, without giving away their destination. Even experienced commanders admitted that trying to predict human movements was nearly impossible. The humans had turned restraint into strategy. News reached smaller colonies and independent systems. Merchants who once traded freely now watched the stars with unease. Ships altered course to avoid human patrol routes. Even species who had never interacted with Earth found themselves unsettled. The humans' message had spread farther than the council chambers. It had reached the minds and hearts of every corner of the galaxy. People did not just fear humans. They were beginning to respect them. There was clarity in their actions, a simplicity that made everyone else seem indecisive and weak by comparison. Meanwhile, humans on Earth went about their work quietly. There were no parades, no displays of power, no speeches meant to intimidate. The fleet left Earth's orbit with the calm precision of a machine, yet there was unmistakable purpose behind every movement. Humans trained, prepared, and communicated with each other with a level of focus that was almost terrifying to watch. They were not angry in the way many assumed they might be. Their response was measured, deliberate, and purposeful. Humans did not seek vengeance for spectacle, they sought justice. Back at the Galactic Council, panic grew. Delegates debated, argued, and consulted intelligence reports. Surely they will negotiate, some said. They always do. Others shook their heads, staring at the data. Not this time, one finally said, and the room fell silent. The humans had crossed a line, and for the first time, the galaxy understood that there were consequences for underestimating them. In the colonies nearest to the destroyed settlement, the reaction was fear mixed with awe. Humans were not just another spacefaring civilization. They were a force that acted according to principles, and those principles were unyielding. There was no room for compromise with those who committed atrocities. No excuse could sway them. Every species that had watched humans negotiate in the past now realized that Earth's patience had limits. And when that line was crossed, the humans would act decisively. Reports began to arrive from the edges of known space. Observers noted the silence of the human fleets. There was no signal, no chatter, no attempts at communication. It was as if the humans had disappeared into the void, yet everyone knew exactly where they were heading. Ships from other civilizations tried to follow, but the humans' tactics made tracking nearly impossible. Each move was calculated, each decision precise. The galaxy, for the first time in centuries, felt uncertainty not from the unknown, but from a species they thought they understood. And in the midst of all this on Earth, people went about their lives with a quiet intensity. Scientists monitored every system. Pilots trained rigorously. Leaders made decisions swiftly, without hesitation. Humans moved as one, with a shared purpose that was unshakable. There were no dramatics, no fanfare. Theirs was not a show of strength. It was a statement of resolve. A human did not have to yell, or broadcast, or threaten. Their actions spoke louder than any words, louder than any transmission could. Across the galaxy, civilizations began to whisper the same thing in stunned voices. Humans don't negotiate with murderers. It was repeated in council halls, among traders, in private chambers where spies gathered. The phrase carried weight, reverence, and a touch of fear. It was not a threat. It was a truth. And truth in the hands of humans, the galaxy was learning, could be unstoppable. For the first time in recorded history, many species began to reconsider how they had viewed humans. They had underestimated them for centuries, assuming diplomacy and patience made them predictable, even weak. But the events unfolding now were a clear reminder that humans were not ordinary. They could forgive. They could talk. They could mediate entire wars. But they would not tolerate murder, injustice, or cruelty. That line, once crossed, was permanent. And the galaxy, watching silently from its distant worlds, realized that Earth had set a precedent that would be remembered for generations. The human fleets moved steadily, calmly, and decisively, leaving no room for misunderstanding. Their path was clear. Their purpose was unwavering. And every species that observed them knew the same truth. Humans were ready to act. They were not asking. They were not negotiating. They were delivering justice. And that, more than anything, was what shocked the galaxy the most. For the humans, it was simple. The colony had been destroyed. Innocent lives had been taken. They would not speak to the killers. They would not compromise. They would ensure that justice was done, no matter how long it took, no matter how far they had to go. This was not war. This was not revenge. This was humanity's way, a clear, unbroken line drawn in the stars, a principle they would not abandon. And as they moved through the void toward the unknown threat, the galaxy could only watch, silent, stunned, and perhaps a little afraid. And so the message spread. Across billions of light years, across countless worlds, across every species that had once considered humans predictable or weak, the truth became undeniable. Humans did not negotiate with murderers. And now the galaxy would wait, holding its breath, to see exactly how that truth would unfold. The council chambers were alive with tension, more so than they had ever been before. For centuries, the Galactic Council had dealt with crises, wars, and betrayals, but nothing had prepared them for this. Humans, known for their patience and fairness, had taken a stand unlike any other. Their message was simple, yet impossible to ignore. They would not negotiate with murderers. Delegates from countless species paced the vast halls, whispering in voices that carried equal parts disbelief and fear. Every report coming from the edges of the galaxy only made their unease worse. The humans were moving, preparing, but no one knew exactly what they planned. In the past, diplomacy had always been a first step with humans. They could reason, they could compromise, and they could calm the most violent of disputes. But now, humans had abandoned their usual approach. Inside the chambers, species who prided themselves on strategy and cunning found themselves at a loss. "They will negotiate," one council member said, trying to keep his voice calm, though his hands shook. "They always do." Others shook their heads. "Not this time," another replied quietly, almost to himself. "They've drawn a line, and it's permanent." Silence followed. No one wanted to say it aloud, but everyone knew it was true. The humans were not just angry, they were resolute, and the galaxy had never seen them like this. Outside the chambers, the flow of information continued. Scouts and traders brought word from across the galaxy. The humans were mobilizing fleets in secret, moving quietly through known space. Unlike other civilizations, they did not announce their movements or broadcast signals. They did not seek attention, nor did they attempt to intimidate. And yet, the mere knowledge of their activity sent ripples of fear through systems light years away. Intelligence analysts in other civilizations struggled to make sense of it. Humans were predictable in ways that were subtle, not in the ways that mattered most to their observers. They could anticipate trade routes, diplomatic patterns, and even negotiation styles. But when it came to justice, humans acted according to principle, not fear, not greed, not politics. And that unpredictability was unnerving. The galaxy was used to negotiating every step, every compromise, every settlement. But the humans had made it clear that some lines could never be crossed. Reports reached the council from the regions near the destroyed colony. Survivors from neighboring systems, who had watched the massacre from afar, spoke in hushed tones. They described the humans' response not as panic, not as vengeance, but as preparation. The humans were organizing, training, and coordinating with a precision that no one could match. There were no public displays of military power, no speeches broadcast across systems. The humans simply moved with quiet, unshakable purpose. Council attempted to contact Earth, hoping to calm the situation, to remind humans of the delicate balance of interstellar politics. Messages were sent, formal invitations were extended, emissaries were dispatched. The replies were always the same. One sentence, repeated without variation, like a principle carved into the very stars. "We do not negotiate with murderers." That was all. No justification, no explanation, no compromise. Just clarity. Among the younger civilizations, there was a growing sense of awe. Species that had previously thought humans were mild, cooperative, and easily managed now realized they were something else entirely. Humans had patience, yes, but that patience had limits. And once crossed, it became something unstoppable. In a way, it was frightening, but it was also inspiring. Humans were a reminder that morality could be a force as strong as any weapon. Or fleet dot inside Earth's command centers, the mood was focused yet calm. Humans did not boast, did not argue, did not call for headlines. They trained, they prepared, they coordinated. Every pilot, every officer, every scientist worked with a clarity that was rare in the galaxy. They were united by a single goal: justice for their lost colony. It was not about revenge or pride. It was about principle. They would act, and they would act decisively, but only within the boundaries they had chosen. Meanwhile, the Galactic Council struggled to understand how to respond. Their usual tactics, their years of experience in negotiation and diplomacy, were failing. Nothing they could offer would make humans reconsider. Offers of treaties, proposals for dialogue, even threats of broader conflict, all fell flat. Humans were not swayed by political games or fear. They were guided by a sense of right and wrong that transcended the usual calculations of power. Across the galaxy, civilizations began to pay attention. Merchants who once ignored human movements started tracking their fleets. Military observers from countless species studied every transmission, every pattern, every small signal. They wanted to predict the humans' next move, but the more they tried, the more elusive humans became. There was no pattern in the ordinary sense. Humans acted not from habit, but from principle, and that made them terrifying and admirable. At the same time, in smaller colonies, people began to whisper about Earth in ways they had never done before. They are not like the rest of us, some said. They will not negotiate. They will not compromise, and they will act. Others nodded, realizing that these were not threats, they were facts. For humans, the rules of morality and justice were absolute. Those who committed atrocities would face consequences no matter who they were or how far they hid. Even within the council, the message began to change the way delegates thought. Species that had once seen humans as minor players in galactic affairs now reconsidered their entire approach. Diplomacy was one thing, patience was another. But humans had shown that principle could outweigh politics, that clarity could outweigh strategy, and that justice could outweigh fear. It was a lesson that the galaxy would remember, whether it liked it or not. As the humans' fleets moved quietly toward the unknown regions, the galaxy watched in a mix of fear and respect. No one knew exactly what they would do when they reached the perpetrators, but one thing was certain: humans had made their position clear. There would be no negotiation, no compromise, no retreat. The massacre had crossed a line, and humans had drawn a new one. Back on Earth, life continued with an unusual intensity. People went about their daily routines, but with a shared awareness of the enormity of what was happening. Families prepared, scientists worked, fleets trained. There was no panic, no chaos, just focus. Every human knew that their actions would be remembered, that their clarity and determination were sending a message not just to the perpetrators, but to the entire galaxy. Humanity would not tolerate murder. Across the stars, civilizations began to whisper the same words in awe and fear. Humans do not negotiate with murderers. The phrase spread like a silent wave, reaching every corner of the galaxy. It was repeated in council chambers, in secret meetings, in trading posts, and on listening stations. The message was simple, yet powerful. Humans acted on principle, and principle, once set, could not be bent. As the humans continued their journey through the void, they left a trail of anticipation behind them. The galaxy had never seen a civilization act with such quiet, deliberate determination. Other species had power, fleets, and technology, but humans had clarity, focus, and a moral code that made them unstoppable. The Council realized, slowly and reluctantly, that Earth had set a precedent that could not be ignored, not the humans themselves, were calm, almost serene, in the midst of all this. There was no desire for spectacle, no need to intimidate. Every decision, every maneuver, every calculation was guided by a single principle: justice for those who had been taken. And that focus, that clarity, was what made them extraordinary. They were not a threat born of anger or ambition. They were a force born of principle. And as the message of their movement spread across the galaxy, the impact became clear. Humans were no longer just a species among many. They were a reminder that morality could be stronger than politics, that clarity could be stronger than chaos, and that principle could be stronger than fear. Every civilization that observed them understood the same thing: humans were coming, and they would not be stopped. The council debated, strategized, and worried, but the humans remained unshaken. There was no compromise, no hesitation, no doubt. They were guided by the same clarity. That had defined their response from the beginning. The colony had been destroyed, and humans had made a choice. Those responsible would face justice, no matter how long it took or how far they had to go. And in that choice, the galaxy saw something new. They saw a civilization willing to act decisively, on principle, unafraid of politics, unafraid of fear, and unafraid of the unknown. Humans had drawn a line in the stars, and it was a line that no one, not even the council, could ignore. The story of humans refusing to negotiate with murderers was spreading, and it would not be forgotten. Across billions of miles, in every corner of space, species whispered, debated, and watched. They did not know what would happen next, but they understood one truth: humans had set a precedent that could change the galaxy forever. And as the human fleets continued their journey, quiet and purposeful, the galaxy held its breath, waiting to see justice delivered. The galaxy watched in a mixture of fear and fascination as reports continued to flow from the regions near human space. The fleets, which had seemed impossible to track at first, were moving with purpose. Ships traveled in precise formations, their engines silent, their movements carefully coordinated. Even the most experienced observers could not predict where they were going or what they would do next. The humans were not broadcasting messages, not signaling their presence. Yet every species that had eyes on the void knew they were coming. Inside Earth's command centers, there was no excitement, no cheering, no displays of power. Every movement was methodical. Officers communicated with calm efficiency, each decision carefully calculated. Pilots studied their maps, checking coordinates and trajectories, but always with flexibility. They were ready for anything, yet they moved as if nothing in the galaxy could distract them from their purpose. It was an unusual sight for those who observed them. Humans were not only powerful, but disciplined, and disciplined in a way that made their power seem unstoppable. The Galactic Council tried to respond. They sent teams to track the fleet, to predict its route, to gather information. Every observation was recorded, analyzed, and debated. Yet the more they observed, the less they understood. Humans did not act according to the usual rules of politics, strategy, or fear. They acted according to principle, and that was something no one in the galaxy had fully learned how to measure. Principle, it seemed, could be as unstoppable as any weapon. News from neighboring systems added to the tension. Observers reported that entire colonies were watching the skies, not out of fear of war, but out of awe. Humans had become a living example of clarity and focus. Merchants altered their trade routes to avoid human movements, not because of a threat, but because they understood that humans were moving with purpose. Every civilization that had studied human history realized, slowly, that patience could be a weapon, and principle could be a force stronger than armies. On Earth, the response was as quiet as it was deliberate. Humans had lost an entire colony, yet there was no hysteria, no impulsive action. There was preparation, training, and communication. Scientists monitored every system, pilots rehearsed maneuvers, and leaders coordinated every element of the fleet. Each human understood the mission. Justice had to be precise, measured, and true. The galaxy had never seen a civilization respond with such calm efficiency to such an atrocity. In the council chambers, the tension grew with every report. Delegates argued, debated, and sometimes shouted. They will negotiate at some point. One insisted, but the others knew better. Humans had drawn a line. They had declared that murderers would not be negotiated with, and they meant it. The council had underestimated humans before, but now they were learning a hard lesson. The humans' patience had limits, and those limits had been reached. Observers across the galaxy tried to understand the humans' motivation. Why did they not seek revenge for show or for power? Why did they not issue threats or demands? The answer was simple. Humans were guided by principle. They acted not out of anger, not out of fear, not out of politics, but out of a deep, unwavering sense of justice. That clarity made them unpredictable, not because they were reckless, but because they were unwilling to compromise on what they knew was right. The fleets continued moving silently, leaving the outer systems in awe. Every move seemed deliberate, almost ritualistic in its precision. Humans were not simply responding to a threat, they were sending a message to the galaxy. Justice would be delivered, but it would not be mixed with politics, compromise, or cowardice. Every species watching knew that humans were operating on a different level, and it was both frightening and inspiring. Closer to the destroyed colony, the neighboring planets watched with a mixture of relief and fear. Relief because they understood that the humans would not allow such atrocities to go unpunished, and fear because they knew the humans' response would be decisive. There was no room for negotiation. There was no room for mistakes. And there was certainly no room for mercy for those who had caused such suffering. Inside Earth, humans remained calm, but their focus was absolute. Every pilot, every officer, every strategist understood their role. There was no discussion about glory, no debate about recognition, no desire for accolades. The mission was justice. The target was clear. And the humans, as a collective, moved toward that goal with an almost single-minded determination. The council tried one last approach. They reached out, sending envoys, offering to mediate, to create a path for dialogue. Humans responded with the same message they had sent before. We do not negotiate with murderers. It was simple, yet it carried enormous weight. There was no threat, no warning, no attempt at intimidation. Just a statement of principle, repeated with quiet certainty. The council realized that words, history, and diplomacy held little sway over humans when justice was at stake. As the fleet moved further into the void, civilizations across the galaxy began to rethink their understanding of humanity. Traders, soldiers, and diplomats whispered among themselves. They spoke of the humans' precision, their calm, and their focus. They spoke of the way humans could combine patience and principle, creating a force that was almost impossible to resist. And they began to understand something they had never realized before. Humans were more than their fleets, more than their technology. Humans were a civilization defined by clarity of purpose and moral certainty. Reports from distant systems added to the tension. Observers saw small groups of ships adjusting course, avoiding human patrols. Civilizations that had previously ignored Earth now took careful note of every movement. No one wanted to be caught in the path of the humans, not because of fear of war, but because of respect for their principle. Humans did not make threats, they acted. And every action was guided by an unwavering sense of justice, even in the Marasti. Quiet corners of the galaxy, species began to speak of humans differently. They were no longer just another advanced species. They were a standard, a reminder of what it meant to act with clarity and purpose. They were proof that principle could be more powerful than fleets, more influential than alliances, and more feared than diplomacy when left unchecked. On board the human ships, life was focused yet calm. Officers gave commands with efficiency. Pilots trained with discipline, and scientists monitored every system. There was no panic, no chaos, no unnecessary tension. Every human knew their role and performed it without hesitation. They were united not by fear or anger, but by the knowledge that justice had to be served. In the council chambers, delegates struggled to adapt. Their usual strategies of persuasion, threat, and negotiation were failing. No matter what they offered, humans remained unshakable. It was a lesson that many found humbling. Humans were a civilization that could be patient, forgiving, and cooperative, but when a moral line was crossed, they became unstoppable. The galaxy had underestimated them for centuries, and now the consequences were clear. As the fleet continued its silent journey, the message spread further. Across systems, across worlds, across civilizations, the phrase repeated in awe and fear: humans do not negotiate with murderers. It became a symbol, a principle, and a warning. It was not a threat. It was truth. And the galaxy, watching, silently, began to understand that humans had set a new standard for justice. Every civilization that observed the humans' movements began to see a pattern, not in their tactics, but in their principles. Humans did not act out of revenge, not out of politics, not out of ambition. They acted according to a moral compass that was clear, unwavering, and absolute. And in that clarity, the galaxy realized humans had created a force more powerful than any fleet, weapon, or alliance. The fleets pressed onward, leaving the outer systems in a state of quiet anticipation. Observers watched, analyzed, and sometimes whispered. They did not know exactly what would happen when humans reached the perpetrators, but they knew one thing: humans were committed. They would act. They would deliver justice. And the galaxy, for the first time in generations, understood the power of a civilization acting according to principle. On Earth, the focus remained absolute. Every human understood their role. Every move was deliberate. Every decision measured. There was no need for spectacle or demonstration. The fleet moved as one, a single organism with a clear purpose. And in that unity, there was power, calm, and inevitability. The council watched helplessly as reports continued to arrive. Humans were moving through the void with precision and purpose, and nothing could stop them. Their determination was clear, their principle unshakable, and their focus unwavering. Every species in the galaxy began to whisper the same thing in awe and fear. Humans did not negotiate with murderers, and now they were coming. And as the human fleets continued toward the unknown threat, the galaxy held its breath. No one knew exactly what would happen next, but every civilization knew that humans were not just acting, they were setting a standard. Justice would be delivered, and it would be guided by a clarity and principle that the galaxy had never seen before. The humans' journey through space was quiet, calm, and deliberate. There were no distractions, no mistakes, no hesitation. Every movement, every decision, every action was guided by one principle: justice for the innocent. And as they pressed on, the news came slowly at first, filtered through sensors, scouts, and intelligence reports from distant systems. The perpetrators had been identified. They were a rogue faction, long thought destroyed, known across the galaxy for their cruelty and raids on helpless colonies. The reports were detailed, and the evidence was clear. The colony the humans had lost was not an accident, not a natural disaster, not even a minor attack. It had been deliberate. Every life had been taken, every structure destroyed, and every trace of the community erased. Humans did not hesitate in the face of such a revelation. They understood immediately that this was a line that could never be crossed. Across the galaxy, the reaction was chaotic. Civilizations that had once dealt with these rogue factions were uneasy. They remembered stories of devastation, of entire worlds falling to the faction's violence. Many had assumed that the faction was gone forever, a relic of history that no longer posed a threat. But the humans' intelligence confirmed the truth. The faction had returned, hidden in the remote sectors, gathering strength and showing no remorse. The Galactic Council attempted to intervene. Delegates sent messages, arranged meetings, and tried to broker a solution. Perhaps if the humans were persuaded to negotiate, a disaster could be avoided. But every message sent to Earth received the same reply, repeated with calm authority. "We do not negotiate with murderers." It was a simple sentence, yet it carried a weight that shook the Council to its core. The humans had made their stance clear, and there would be no deviation. For centuries, other civilizations had studied humans, believing that patience, diplomacy, and compromise were their greatest strengths. And they were correct until now. The massacre had broken a threshold. The humans' patience had ended, replaced by a quiet, focused resolve that the galaxy had never witnessed. It was not anger in the usual sense, nor was it revenge. It was principle. Every human understood that justice had to be served, and no one, not even the Council, could sway them from this course. Closer to the destroyed colony, news spread of human activity. Scouts and satellites observed human fleets moving in tight formations, engines humming silently, weapon systems tested but unused. There was no chaos, no rash action, no overt displays of force. Humans were deliberate, precise, and efficient. It was a stark contrast to the unpredictable and often reckless nature of other civilizations. Every movement was calculated, every decision deliberate. Observers tried to analyze human strategy. Fleet commanders from other species debated endlessly about what the humans might do when they encountered the faction. Some argued that the humans would attempt to negotiate at the last moment, believing that they were too principled to strike without warning. Others insisted that the humans would strike with full force immediately, using overwhelming power to crush the faction before it could respond. In the end, no one could agree. Human behavior, guided by principle, did not fit into any known framework of military or political strategy. On Earth, humans were calm but focused. Every officer, every pilot, every scientist understood the stakes. This was not about glory, not about vengeance, not about politics. It was about justice. The fleet moved like a single organism, each part supporting the other, each individual, aware of their role and responsibility. Communication was precise, clear, and minimal. Humans did not waste energy on empty words or posturing. Every action spoke louder than any speech could. Meanwhile, the Galactic Council grew increasingly desperate. They attempted to negotiate with the faction themselves, hoping to prevent a confrontation that could have catastrophic consequences. Envoys were sent, messages relayed, offers made. The faction responded with arrogance and defiance, mocking the Council, dismissing every attempt at diplomacy. And still, humans did not negotiate. They did not need to. Their presence, their movement, and their principle sent a message louder than any words could. Across the galaxy, civilizations watched in awe. The humans' clarity was striking. They were not swayed by fear, not by threats, and not by politics. Their patience had limits, and those limits had been reached. In a way, it was terrifying. A species that had once been underestimated was now acting with precision and purpose on a scale that few could match. Traders rerouted, observers studied every move, and even the most powerful fleets in the galaxy paused to watch. Humans were coming, and everyone knew it. Inside the fleets, life was focused. Pilots trained endlessly, but without panic. Officers coordinated movements with precision, ensuring that every calculation was accurate. Scientists monitored systems, anticipating possible threats and preparing responses. Yet despite the intensity, there was calm. Humans did not act rashly. They were deliberate, moving with the knowledge that every step mattered. Every decision could determine the outcome, and humans approached each with the seriousness it deserved. Faction, unaware of the full scale of what was coming, continued to operate in secrecy. They had grown confident, believing that the humans' patience would protect them. They had misjudged completely. Humans did not act for spectacle, did not issue threats for show, and did not seek revenge. They acted with clarity and principle, and their target was defined. The humans' presence alone was enough to unsettle the faction, though they did not yet realize the full extent of what awaited them. The Council tried one last time to mediate, hoping that Earth would at least listen. Envoys were sent with carefully crafted arguments, reminding humans of diplomacy, of alliances, of potential consequences. But the reply was the same, unwavering as ever. We do not negotiate with murderers. The Council could do nothing. The humans had set a line in the galaxy, and no amount of persuasion or fear could move it. Civilizations watching from afar began to understand the power of principle. Humans were not powerful because of their fleets or weapons, though both were formidable. They were powerful because they acted according to a moral code that was absolute. Justice, once defined, could not be ignored. The galaxy began to whisper the phrase over and over, "Humans do not negotiate with murderers." It became a mantra, a warning, a lesson. Closer to the edge of known space, humans continued their advance. Every system they passed observed their discipline, precision, and calm. Pilots executed maneuvers with perfect coordination. Officers monitored every variable. Humans were unstoppable, not because of aggression, but because of focus. They were guided by principle, and that principle had already begun to reshape the galaxy's understanding of power and morality. The rogue faction remained unaware of the full force approaching them. They had assumed that humanity's patience would allow them to continue their operations without interruption. They had miscalculated. Humans did not act impulsively, but they also did not hesitate when a moral line was crossed. Every life lost in the colony mattered. Every act of cruelty mattered. Humans were prepared to respond, and they would do so with precision, clarity, and principle. Within Earth's command centers, the mood was serious. There was no celebration, no discussion of victory, no boastfulness. Humans understood the stakes. The galaxy had underestimated them for centuries, and now they were showing what it meant to act with clarity and focus. Every human involved understood the responsibility. Justice was not an abstract idea. It was an action that had to be carried out with care, precision, and effectiveness. Across the galaxy, civilizations whispered and debated. Observers marveled. At the humans' discipline, the Council feared their determination, and the faction continued in ignorance. The humans were moving silently, yet every movement was deliberate. They did not negotiate. They did not hesitate. They acted according to principle. And that principle, more than any fleet, weapon, or alliance, was unstoppable. The message of humans refusing to negotiate spread further. Traders, scouts, and diplomats carried the story from one system to another. Every species learned the same truth. Humans were a force defined by clarity, justice, and principle. They were not reckless. They were not impulsive. But when a line was crossed, they acted. And nothing could stop them. As the human fleets continued their advance, the galaxy waited. Every civilization watched and speculated, trying to predict what would happen next. No one could. Human actions were guided by principle, not prediction. Their patience had ended. Their focus was absolute. Their target was clear. Justice would be delivered, and it would not be compromised. And so the galaxy held its breath. Humans were coming, guided by principle, acting with clarity, and delivering a message that had never been heard before. We do not negotiate with murderers. It was more than a sentence. It was a standard, a warning, and a promise. Every species that watched understood the truth. When humans acted according to principle, the galaxy had to pay attention. The fleet pressed onward, calm, disciplined, and unstoppable. Observers recorded every movement, analyzed every decision, and still could not fully understand humans. They were not predictable, not because they were reckless, but because they acted from clarity and principle. And in that clarity, the galaxy realized humans had created a force unlike any other. The rogue faction remained oblivious. They assumed humans would hesitate, would negotiate, or be swayed by diplomacy. They were wrong. Humans had drawn a line. Every life lost, every act of cruelty mattered. And now the humans were coming to ends. The galaxy had been holding its breath for weeks, waiting to see what humans would do. The rogue faction, unaware of the full scale of humanity's resolve, continued their operations in the outer regions, confident that Earth would hesitate. They believed the humans would send messages, negotiate, or at least take time to deliberate. They were wrong. The humans had already decided. Justice would be delivered, but it would be measured, deliberate, and unwavering. On Earth, every command center was alive with activity, but it was calm, controlled, and precise. Humans did not panic. They did not argue about what to do next. Every officer, every pilot, every technician knew their role. Every person understood that they were part of a collective effort, a coordinated mission to enforce a principle that had been violated. It was not about revenge. It was not about power. It was about justice, and nothing to distract them from it. The Galactic Council tried again to intervene. Envoys were sent, messages dispatched, proposals made. Perhaps there could be a compromise. Perhaps the humans could be persuaded to delay, to negotiate, to consider alternatives. But the reply was as consistent as it was chilling. We do not negotiate with murderers. It was repeated in every message, every channel, every communication. Attempt. There would be no exceptions, no delays, and no reconsideration. The humans had drawn a line, and the galaxy had to accept it. Closer to the faction's strongholds, human fleets began to form strategic positions. Ships moved in perfect synchronization, scanning systems, coordinating approaches, and anticipating every possible outcome. Observers from other species recorded their movements in awe. Humans were not reckless. They were not impatient. They acted with precision it was almost impossible to comprehend. Every maneuver, every adjustment, every deployment was guided by purpose. There was no chaos, no improvisation. It was like watching a single mind operating. Across thousands of ships. The rogue faction still did not fully grasp what was coming. They had grown confident, believing that Earth's patience would prevent a direct response. They underestimated the humans' ability to act decisively without spectacle or threats. They assumed that patience meant hesitation. They assumed that principle could be bent. They were about to learn otherwise. Humans did not seek to intimidate. They did not broadcast threats or warnings for show. Their presence alone was enough. Observers reported the fleet moving with calm authority, engines humming, weapon systems ready but unraised. Humans did not act impulsively, but their focus was absolute. Every individual understood that the mission was not a game or a display, it was justice. And that clarity sent ripples of fear and respect throughout the galaxy. The Galactic Council watched helplessly. Their usual tools, diplomacy, persuasion, threats, even alliances, were ineffective. Humans did not negotiate with murderers. They had defined their position in the clearest terms, and no argument could change it. Every communication, every movement, every action reinforced that humans were operating on a level of principle that no other civilization fully understood. Across distant systems, whispers spread. Humans will act, traders said. They do not negotiate, soldiers repeated. The phrase became a mantra, a warning, a symbol of the power of clarity and principle. Other civilizations began to realize that humans were not just another spacefaring species. They were a standard, a force guided by moral certainty. Every fleet, every leader, every diplomat began to understand that principle could be more powerful than fleets, more influential than politics, and more feared than diplomacy when left unchecked. The rogue faction remained unaware of the true scale of the human operation. They were arrogant, assuming that Earth's patience would protect them from consequences. They had no idea that every life lost, every act of cruelty, mattered to the humans. Every ship, every maneuver, every deployment had been calculated in response to the suffering caused. The humans were coming not for revenge, not for pride, but for principle. And that principle was an unshakable dot on Earth. Humans continued there. Preparation. Pilots trained tirelessly, officers coordinated movements with precision, and scientists monitored every variable. There was no celebration, no boastfulness, no distraction. Every human involved understood the responsibility that rested on their shoulders. Justice was not an abstract idea. It was an action that had to be carried out perfectly, deliberately, and effectively. Every life taken by the faction demanded response, and humans would not fail Dot as the fleet approached the outer systems. Observers from other civilizations marveled at their discipline. Ships moved in perfect harmony. Communication was minimal but precise, and every maneuver reinforced the impression of a single focused purpose. Humans were not acting out of anger or fear. They were acting from principle, and that principle gave them a calm, unshakable authority. Even the most powerful fleets in the galaxy paused to observe, knowing that when humans acted on principle, the results were inevitable. Closer to the faction's strongholds, humans prepared one final opportunity for surrender. It was not negotiation. In the traditional sense, there would be no treaties, no deals, no compromise. Humans sent a single clear message to the leaders responsible for the massacre. Surrender now, release all captives, and face justice. There would be no delay, no excuses, no escape. The opportunity was limited, precise, and deliberate, reflecting the human's principle that justice must be measured, but cannot be ignored. The faction, unaware of the scale of the human fleets, responded with arrogance and mockery. They believed they could continue their operations, believing that Earth would hesitate. They were wrong. The humans' calm authority, their precise coordination, and their unwavering focus made it clear that this was not a negotiation. It was a final opportunity, offered in clarity and principle, and any refusal would have consequences. The Galactic Council watched in silence, unable to intervene. Every communication attempt failed. Humans had acted, and there would be no compromise. Every species observing understood the same truth. Humans had defined a moral boundary that could not be crossed. They did not act impulsively, but when a line was crossed, they acted with precision, calm, and inevitability. Across distant systems, civilizations whispered, debated, and marveled. Humans were not like other species. They were patient, cooperative, and forgiving, but when justice demanded action, they became unstoppable. Their actions were guided not by ambition, fear, or politics, but by principle. Every fleet, every leader, every observer understood the significance. Humanity had drawn a line in the galaxy, and it could not be ignored on Earth. The fleet moved as one. Pilots executed maneuvers with precision. Officers coordinated movements and monitored every variable. Scientists predicted potential threats. adjusting systems as needed. Every human involved understood the importance of their actions. Justice was not an abstract ideal. It was a responsibility that demanded focus, clarity, and execution. Every step mattered, and humans would not fail. Rogue faction, still arrogant, failed to grasp the reality of what awaited them. They believed they could outmaneuver patience, evade responsibility, and escape principle. They were wrong. Humans acted with focus, precision, and an unshakable sense of justice. Every loss, every act of cruelty demanded response. And humans would deliver without hesitation, without compromise, and without error. As the final communication reached the faction, the galaxy watched in anticipation. The humans' message was clear, precise, and unyielding. Surrender, release the captives, and face justice. There would be no compromise, no negotiation, no escape. The galaxy understood, for the first time, the full extent of humanity's principle. Justice would be delivered, and it would be guided by clarity, focus, and moral certainty. Across countless systems, observers whispered the phrase again and again: humans do not negotiate with murderers. It became a lesson, a warning, a standard. The galaxy watched as humanity acted not from anger, not from fear, not from ambition, but from principle. And in that principle lay power, calm, and inevitability. Every species that observed understood the same truth. Humans had set a standard for justice that would not be ignored. And as the fleet pressed closer to the faction, moving with precise, deliberate focus, the galaxy realized something profound. Humanity was more than technology, more than ships, more than numbers. Humans were defined by clarity of purpose, discipline, and moral certainty. When they acted on principle, the universe had no choice but to pay attention. The rogue faction, finally recognizing the scale and determination of the human response, could only watch in disbelief. They had misjudged humanity's patience, underestimated their focus, and ignored their principle. And now, facing the full weight of justice, they realized too late that the humans' calm authority could not be stopped. And so, the galaxy held its breath, watching history unfold. Humans had offered one last opportunity, measured and precise. They had drawn a line, and that line could not be crossed. Justice would be delivered, guided by clarity, focus, and principle. Every observer understood the message, and every species would remember it for generations. Humans did not negotiate with murderers. The fleet pressed on, calm, precise, and unstoppable. Observers from distant systems recorded every movement, studied every maneuver, and whispered in awe. Humanity was more than a species. The galaxy waited in silence. Every civilization, every fleet, every observer held their breath as the human forces approached the rogue faction's stronghold. The silence was heavy, broken only by distant communications and the faint hum of engines moving with perfect precision. Humans had come not for spectacle, not for glory, not for revenge, but for justice. And that justice was about to be delivered in a way the galaxy had never seen before. On Earth, command centers were quiet, yet focused. Humans moved with deliberate precision, each action purposeful, each calculation accurate. There was no celebration, no dramatics, no chatter about heroism. Every individual understood their role, every pilot knew their responsibility, and every officer coordinated with calm authority. They were not acting out of anger. They were acting from principle. Every decision reflected the understanding that justice must be clear, measured, and unstoppable. The Galactic Council watched helplessly, knowing they could do nothing. Their fleets, their strategies, their diplomacy, all of it had failed to sway humanity. No amount of persuasion or threat could bend the humans' moral code. They had drawn a line, and they would enforce it. The phrase repeated across council: chambers, across star systems, across every listening post. Humans do not negotiate with murderers. It was no longer a statement. It was a law of the galaxy, recognized by every civilization that observed the events unfolding. The rogue. Factions still underestimated what they faced. They were confident in their hidden networks, in their small fleets, and in the isolation of their systems. They believed that Earth's patience was a weakness. They assumed that principle could be delayed or ignored. They were wrong. Humans had studied every possible scenario, anticipated every potential move, and prepared for every outcome. The faction's arrogance would soon meet its match. As the human fleets approached, the first waves entered the outer defenses of the rogue faction. Sensors detected the fleets, alarms sounded, and panic began to ripple through the faction's ranks. They had no idea what they faced. They had prepared for battles, for raids, for diplomacy, but not for humans acting with absolute focus on principle. Every maneuver, every deployment, every strategy they had relied on was irrelevant. Humans were not there to negotiate. Humans were there to enforce a standard. The first encounter was precise, almost surgical. Human ships engaged the faction's patrols with calculated efficiency. Weapons were fired with exact timing, targeting systems incapacitated without unnecessary destruction, allowing the humans to assert control while minimizing chaos. Every move demonstrated discipline, strategy, and focus. Observers across nearby systems recorded the events, realizing that humans had elevated military action to something more. Principle in motion. As the rogue faction attempted to regroup, human forces tightened their formations. Communication was minimal but perfect. Every ship knew its position. Every pilot understood its role. Humans moved as one, a single organism executing a plan honed over months of preparation. There was no hesitation, no impulsive reaction, no room for error. The galaxy watched in awe as humanity demonstrated that precision guided by principle could overcome even the most unpredictable enemies. The Council attempted last-minute interventions. Messages were sent, warnings relayed, and suggestions offered. Perhaps there could still be diplomacy. Perhaps there could still be a path to avoid further destruction. But every message met the same human reply, calm, unwavering, and clear. We do not negotiate with murderers. The Council realized finally that no discussion could stop humanity. The humans' decision was absolute, and the consequences would follow. In the midst of battle, humans maintained calm and control. Pilots maneuvered through dangerous zones with steady hands. Officers coordinated multi-ship attacks with minimal communication. Scientists monitored energy readings, weapons calibration, and environmental variables. Every human involved understood that they were not simply fighting an enemy. They were delivering justice, executing a principle that demanded clarity and precision. The rogue faction began to understand the reality of what they faced. Their forces were being disabled systematically, their escape routes blocked, their command structure disrupted. They had expected chaos and improvisation, but humans acted with calm authority. Every movement was deliberate, every strategy countered with perfect anticipation. The faction realized that they were facing a force unlike any other. Humans acting on principle. Across the galaxy, observers whispered the phrase again and again. Humans do not negotiate with murderers. Traders, diplomats, and soldiers alike marveled at the discipline, the calm, and the unwavering clarity of purpose. Humans were not powerful because of technology alone. They were powerful because they combined patience with principle, discipline, with clarity, and focus with morality. Every civilization watching understood the same truth. This was not just a battle, it was history in motion. Inside human command centers, no one spoke of victory. The focus remained absolute. Every maneuver, every decision, every calculation was guided by the understanding that justice had to be delivered with precision. Humans did not celebrate. They did not seek recognition. They acted because it was right, because principle demanded it, and because the universe would not bend morality to convenience. The rogue faction, now fully aware of the human forces surrounding them, scrambled desperately. Ships fired weapons haphazardly. Systems attempted to jam communications, and commanders shouted orders. But humans were prepared. Every attack was anticipated, every countermeasure accounted for. There was no panic among the humans. Every action, every calculation, every move was a reflection of their clarity, their focus, and their principle. Finally, the human fleets established complete control. Rogue ships were immobilized, key structures were secured, and all attempts at escape were neutralized. The humans had arrived, not for revenge, not for spectacle, not for chaos. They had arrived to enforce justice. Every life lost in the destroyed colony, every act of cruelty by the faction, had been considered, and now consequences would follow. The galaxy witnessed humanity acting not out of fear or anger, but with perfect, deliberate focus, leaders above. The rogue faction were contacted, not with threats, but with clarity. Humans offered one final opportunity to face justice, surrender, acknowledge the crimes, and take responsibility. There would be no negotiation beyond that. There would be no excuses, no evasion, no delay. The principle was absolute. Murderers cannot negotiate. And for the first time, the faction understood the gravity of humanity's resolve. The Galactic Council observed in stunned silence. Every civilization watching realized something profound. Humans had redefined the concept of justice. They were not governed by fear, nor by greed, nor by political convenience. They were governed by principle. They acted with patience, focus, and moral clarity that no other civilization could match. The galaxy began to whisper not in fear, but in awe. Humanity had created a standard that would endure for generations. As the faction surrendered, humans executed the final stages of their plan with care and precision. Captives were freed, systems were secured, and order was restored. There was no unnecessary destruction, no chaos left behind, no desire to humiliate or dominate. Justice had been delivered with calm authority, and every action reflected the clarity of principle that had guided humans from the beginning. Across the galaxy, the reaction was profound. Civilizations began to understand that humanity's power was not in fleets alone, nor in weapons alone, but in their clarity, focus, and unwavering principle. Humans had demonstrated that moral certainty could move fleets, overcome arrogance, and redefine the rules of the galaxy. The phrase repeated endlessly, "Humans do not negotiate with murderers." It was no longer a warning. It was a law, a lesson, and a standard for every species to remember. On Earth, the mood was calm. There was no celebration, no fanfare, no boasting. Humans had done what they had set out to do. Justice had been delivered. Principle had been enforced, and the galaxy had witnessed the power of clarity. Pilots, officers, and scientists returned to their stations, knowing that their work had made a difference. They had acted with focus, with discipline, and with moral certainty. The rogue faction, humbled and defeated, faced the consequences of their actions. They had underestimated humans, ignored principle, and committed atrocities that could not be ignored. And now they had learned what countless civilizations had discovered too late. Humans do not negotiate with murderers. The lesson was clear, permanent, and universal. In the weeks that followed, the galaxy slowly absorbed what had happened. Reports, analysis, and accounts spread from system to system. Civilizations began to adjust their diplomacy, trade, and alliances in recognition of humanity's principle. Humanity had set a new standard. Clarity, focus, and moral certainty could outweigh fleets, weapons, and politics. They had reminded the galaxy that justice was not negotiable, and that principle could move even the stars themselves. And as humans returned to their routine on Earth, the message remained clear. They had acted not out of vengeance, not for recognition, not for power, but for justice. Their patience had ended, their focus had been absolute, and their principle had been enforced. The galaxy had watched, learned, and would remember forever. Humans do not negotiate with